The encounter in the operating room. The soft hum of hospital machinery created a rhythm in the bustling corridors of Memorial Hospital. Nurses, doctors, and technicians moved purposefully from one room to another, a steady dance of efficiency and care. Among the seasoned professionals, Dr. Terry Harrell stood out. Known for his medical expertise, but also for his harsh, often condescending demeanor, he was respected yet feared by the hospital staff. Today, he was performing a gallbladder surgery, a routine procedure he could practically do with his eyes closed. Everything in the operating room was under his control, exactly how he liked it. He rarely acknowledged the nurses assisting him, seeing them as mere instruments in his surgical theater. Among them today was Martha Brown, a highly competent and experienced nurse who had worked at the hospital for over a decade. As Martha entered the operating room to assist, her quiet confidence was evident. She had been called in last minute due to another nurse's absence, but she had reviewed the patient's chart thoroughly and was prepared. She moved with precision, her dark skin a stark contrast against the sterile whites and blues of the operating room, embodying a calm efficiency that came from years of experience. "Good afternoon, Dr. Harrell. I'm here to assist with this procedure," Martha said, her tone professional. Dr. Harrell barely acknowledged her, his eyes fixed on the surgical table. "Fine. Just stay out of my way," he muttered, his tone dismissive. Martha's heart sank a little at the cold reception, but she was used to such treatment. She had encountered prejudice before, subtle and overt, but her dedication to her work had always carried her through. She positioned herself to monitor the patient's vitals, her attention on the patient's needs rather than Dr. Harrell's attitude. As the surgery progressed, Dr. Harrell's commands became sharper, his tone more irritated. "Clamp," he barked, holding out his hand without looking. Martha immediately reached for the correct instrument, moving with the practiced ease of a professional who had done this countless times. But as she handed the clamp to him, her elbow brushed his sleeve lightly. Instantly, Dr. Harrell jerked his arm back, nearly dropping the clamp. His eyes flared with anger, and he glared at her with a look of contempt. "Do you not know how to maintain a sterile field? Keep your distance," he snapped, his voice laced with irritation. Martha took a steadying breath, suppressing the hurt that flared up inside her. She had done nothing wrong. It had been a minor, harmless brush. But she knew better than to argue with someone in his position, especially in the middle of a procedure. "Yes, doctor," she replied evenly, taking a step back, her posture still professional despite the sting of his words. The other staff in the room shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. They had witnessed Dr. Harrell's discriminatory behavior before, but no one dared speak up, fearing the repercussions. Martha, however, was used to such moments. She had always chosen to respond with grace and professionalism, a decision she held on to despite the challenges it often presented. As the surgery continued, Dr. Harrell's commands grew increasingly harsh. He seemed to relish in belittling her, barking orders in a tone that was far from respectful. Each time she handed him an instrument, he would reach without looking, as if contact with her was beneath him. The tension in the room was palpable, the soft beeps of monitors the only sounds filling the silence between his orders. Finally, as he completed the last stitch, Martha stepped back, giving him the space he so clearly demanded. She fought to keep her expression neutral, her pride wounded but intact. She had endured moments like this throughout her career, but they never ceased to hurt. After the procedure, Martha quietly gathered her things and left the operating room. She was shaken but determined not to let Dr. Harrell's prejudice affect her commitment to her work. Her patient came first, always. The frustration she felt simmered beneath her composed exterior as she walked toward the nurse's station. Later that afternoon, Martha knew that, despite the discomfort, she needed to address the situation. Confronting Dr. Harrell was a risk, but she couldn't allow him to continue treating her, and potentially others, with such blatant disrespect. After finishing her rounds, she made her way to his office. Knocking firmly on the door, a muffled "come in" came from inside. Taking a deep breath, Martha stepped into the office, noting the meticulously organized desk and the framed accolades on the wall. Dr. Harrell looked up, his expression impatient. "What is it, Nurse Brown?" he asked, barely concealing his irritation. "Dr. Harrell," Martha began, her voice steady, "I wanted to discuss what happened in the operating room earlier. If there was something specific about my assistance that concerned you, I'd appreciate knowing so I can ensure the best care for our patients." He scoffed, setting his pen down. "Nurse Brown," he replied, emphasizing her title with disdain, "I don't owe you any explanations on how I manage my team. Your job is to follow instructions, nothing more." Martha's composure remained intact, but her jaw tightened. She had come here seeking a professional conversation, but he seemed intent on making this personal. "I understand that, Doctor," she said evenly. "I'm here because I believe in clear communication. It benefits our patients." Dr. Harrell's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he stepped around the desk, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Let me make myself very clear, Nurse Brown. This is my hospital, my operating room, and you will follow my rules. Do you understand?" Before she could respond, he reached out, gripping her wrist tightly. Martha gasped, shocked by his sudden aggression. The mask of professionalism he wore had slipped, revealing a far more menacing side. "Let go of me," she said, her voice calm but firm. He sneered, tightening his grip. "You'll leave when I say you can," he growled, his face inches from hers. Then, in an act of shocking aggression, he raised his hand and slapped her. The sound echoed through the office, and Martha stumbled back, her cheek stinging from the blow. For a moment, she stood there, stunned, her mind reeling from what had just happened. But she quickly composed herself, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, her head held high despite the pain radiating from her cheek. As she left, a janitor named Ron, who had witnessed the entire incident from the hallway, approached her, his face full of concern. "Ms. Martha," he whispered, "I saw what he did to you. That was wrong." Martha nodded, her voice steady but low. "Thank you, Ron. I appreciate your support." Before he could respond, they both heard the sound of footsteps approaching. It was Dr. Harrell, his expression smug as he stepped out of his office, clearly unconcerned about the incident. He paused when he saw Ron. "Is there a problem here?" Dr. Harrell asked, his tone dripping with arrogance. Ron shook his head, but his eyes held a spark of defiance. "No, doctor. Just doing my job." Satisfied, Dr. Harrell walked away, but not before tossing a crisp envelope toward Ron, his implication clear. "Keep this to yourself," he muttered. Ron looked down at the envelope, a silent promise of money for his silence, but he could not ignore what he had witnessed. This wasn't just a personal matter for Martha. It was a question of respect and justice. As Dr. Harrell walked away, Martha and Ron shared a look. Unspoken but understood, they both knew that this was not over. Martha was ready to fight back, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been belittled or mistreated. And with Ron as her witness, she was ready to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Gathering allies and the seeds of justice. The stinging pain on Martha's cheek had dulled by the time she returned to the break room, but the emotional toll weighed heavily on her. She sat at the small, circular table by the window, staring out at the gray autumn sky, lost in thought. She had faced discrimination and unfair treatment throughout her career, but this was different. Dr. Harrell's blatant disrespect and violent actions had crossed a line that she couldn't ignore. As she sat there, the door to the break room opened. Ron, the janitor who had witnessed everything, walked in, his face a mixture of sympathy and resolve. He pulled a chair up to the table and sat across from her, his gaze steady. "Martha," he said quietly, leaning forward, "I saw what happened. You don't have to go through this alone. That man has crossed too many lines, and he needs to be held accountable." Martha looked up, surprised by his support. She'd always known Ron to be a kind-hearted person, but she hadn't expected him to stand by her in such a bold way. "Thank you, Ron," she replied, her voice soft. "But this is a big risk for you. Dr. Harrell, he's not just any doctor. He has connections, power. People like him usually don't face consequences." Ron's jaw tightened, his eyes reflecting a quiet determination. "You know, my family and I have faced people like him before. My mom worked as a housekeeper all her life, and I grew up seeing her treated as if she were invisible. People looked at her like she didn't matter." He paused, clenching his fists. "But I promised myself I'd never stand by if I saw something like this happening. So here I am." Martha felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time since the incident, she felt less alone. She reached across the table and placed a hand on Ron's. "Thank you, Ron. That means a lot to me. I'm not backing down. I just didn't know where to start. But now I think I do." She pulled out her phone and opened her contacts, scrolling until she found a name she hadn't reached out to in a long time. Linda Ramirez. Linda was an HR representative at the hospital, someone she had met during her orientation years ago. Though they had rarely interacted, Martha remembered Linda as a straightforward, fair-minded person. Martha hesitated before pressing the call button, but Ron gave her an encouraging nod. She took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang twice before Linda picked up. "Hello, this is Linda Ramirez," came the friendly but professional voice on the other end. "Hi, Linda. This is Martha Brown from the surgical unit," Martha began, her voice steady but laced with a hint of vulnerability. I need to talk to you about something urgent. It's about Dr. Terry Harrell." There was a brief pause, and Martha could sense the wheels turning in Linda's mind. "Martha, is everything okay? You sound shaken." Martha took a deep breath, glancing at Ron, who gave her a reassuring nod. "No, things are not okay. I don't feel comfortable discussing this over the phone, but it involves harassment and, well, an assault. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss it in detail. I have a witness as well." Linda's voice was calm, but Martha could hear the concern underlying her words. "Of course, Martha. I'll make time for you. How does tomorrow morning sound? We can meet in the HR office, where we can speak privately." "That sounds perfect. Thank you, Linda." Martha ended the call, feeling a small weight lifted from her shoulders. She turned to Ron, who gave her a supportive smile. "I'll be there with you, Martha. I'll tell Linda everything I saw," he said, his voice firm. "But do you think it's enough? I mean, Dr. Harrell, he's known to have connections, even with some people on the board." Martha nodded, understanding his concern. She considered that too. Dr. Harrell's influence was extensive, but she also knew that justice wasn't something she could pursue half-heartedly. "I know it's risky, Ron, but we can't let him get away with this. Besides, we have more than just our testimonies. There's also the hospital security footage. It may have captured him handing you that envelope." Ron's eyes widened slightly. "You're right. My friend Mike works in security. He owes me a favor. I could ask him to pull the footage. If it shows Dr. Harrell handing me that envelope, that'll strengthen our case." "Exactly. But we need to move carefully. We don't want to give him a chance to cover his tracks." Martha's mind was working quickly now, her resolve growing. "Let's gather what we can, and I'll make sure Linda understands the gravity of this." With their plan in place, they parted ways for the evening. Martha went home, her thoughts still spinning. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but her resolve was solidified by her husband, James's unwavering support, and Ron's commitment to help. She fell asleep that night feeling a renewed sense of purpose and determination. The next morning, Martha arrived at the hospital early, wearing a calm but resolute expression. She met Ron near the entrance, and together, they made their way to the HR office. The sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway felt colder than usual, but she kept her chin up, ready to face whatever was ahead. Linda was waiting for them in a private conference room, a file folder open in front of her. She greeted them warmly, but Martha could see the concern in her eyes. As they took their seats, Linda's expression turned serious. "Martha, Ron," she began, her tone gentle, "I understand you both have some serious concerns regarding Dr. Harrell. Please, take your time and tell me everything." Martha took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She started from the beginning, recounting the events in the operating room, the blatant discrimination, and Dr. Harrell's unwarranted aggression. Ron corroborated her story, adding his own perspective as a witness. Linda listened attentively, her eyes never leaving them. When Martha mentioned the slap, Linda's expression hardened. Violence in any form is unacceptable, but especially in a workplace dedicated to care and healing, Linda said, her voice steady but edged with indignation. "And to hear that he tried to bribe you, Ron, to keep this quiet. This is incredibly disturbing." Ron nodded. "I wasn't going to take that money, but it showed me how far he's willing to go to keep his reputation untarnished. I think it's important for you to know that we might have security footage of the exchange as well. I can speak to someone in security about retrieving it." Linda leaned back in her chair, considering their words carefully. "This is more than enough to start a formal investigation. With the security footage and your statements, we'll have substantial evidence to back up the claims." Relief washed over Martha, but she knew that this was only the beginning. She would still need to face Dr. Harrell again, knowing that he could try to retaliate if he sensed a threat to his position. But with Linda's support and Ron's unwavering loyalty, she felt empowered to see this through to the end. "Martha, Ron," Linda continued, "I want you both to know that we're committed to maintaining a safe and respectful environment here. No one is above the rules, not even Dr. Harrell. I will personally ensure this is handled with the seriousness it deserves." With that assurance, Martha felt the weight of her fear begin to lift. She had allies who were willing to stand beside her, who believed in the justice she was fighting for. Later that day, as Martha returned to her rounds, she noticed Dr. Harrell in the hallway, his expression as smug and self-assured as ever. He gave her a dismissive glance, clearly unaware of the storm brewing around him. The memory of his slap echoed in her mind, but she kept her face neutral, determined not to give him any satisfaction. But behind her calm facade, Martha knew that things were about to change. She had endured his disdain and prejudice for far too long, and the courage to fight back had been ignited within her. Dr. Harrell would soon discover that no amount of arrogance could shield him from the consequences of his actions. With each step, Martha grew more resolute. The path to justice would not be easy, but she was prepared to take it, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by someone who believed themselves untouchable. And as she walked past him, chin high, Martha felt the weight of hope and resilience lift her. This was only the beginning, and she was ready to see it through. The evidence unfolds. That afternoon, Martha returned to her duties, trying to focus on her patients, but a fire of determination simmered beneath her calm demeanor. The events of the previous day had left an indelible mark on her heart. She would never forget the sting of Dr. Harrell's slap, nor the venom in his words. But today, armed with allies and a burgeoning plan, she felt a renewed strength that she hadn't felt in years. She met Ron in the hallway as she was heading to her next patient. Ron looked more confident than ever, a hint of anticipation in his expression. "Martha," he whispered, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "I spoke to Mike in security. He managed to retrieve the footage from outside Dr. Harrell's office. We've got a clear video of him handing me the envelope. You can see his face, the cash, everything." A thrill of hope surged through her. "That's excellent, Ron. This is exactly what we need. Did you give it to Linda yet?" Ron nodded. "I just dropped it off with her. She said she'd review it and prepare it for the formal investigation." He paused, his voice softening. "You know, this is all pretty intense. Are you holding up okay?" Martha took a deep breath, managing a small smile. "Honestly, Ron, I'm tired. This has been hard. But knowing I'm not alone in this, it means everything. And we're closer to justice than we've ever been." He nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're all behind you, Martha. Whatever happens, remember that." With that reassurance, she continued with her rounds, feeling a mixture of nervous energy and calm resolve. As she worked, whispers followed her through the hospital corridors. She noticed staff members casting sidelong glances at her, murmuring under their breath as she passed. News of her confrontation with Dr. Harold had begun to spread, and the hospital's atmosphere was tense, like the calm before a storm. Later that evening, Martha received a call from Linda, who informed her that the hospital board had been notified of the formal complaint. They were planning an emergency meeting the next morning to review the footage and the statements. Linda's tone was reassuring, but she cautioned Martha to be prepared for a fight. "They might try to protect him, Martha," Linda warned. "People like Dr. Harold have connections, and he's well respected by some of the board members. But don't let that deter you. We're bringing this to light, and they can't ignore what they see." Martha thanked Linda and hung up, feeling both encouraged and apprehensive. She spent the rest of the evening with her husband, James, discussing the upcoming meeting. James was furious about the incident, but he respected Martha's decision to handle it her way. Together, they went over what to expect, steeling themselves for the possible backlash. "I'll be there with you tomorrow," James said, his voice unwavering. "They need to understand the severity of this situation, and as the hospital's owner, I'm going to make sure they know exactly how serious we are." Martha looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, James. This isn't just for me. It's for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly here. We're doing the right thing." The following morning, Martha walked into the hospital feeling the weight of the day ahead pressing down on her. As she made her way to the conference room, she saw staff members stopping mid-conversation to watch her pass. Some gave her encouraging smiles, while others seemed tense and uneasy. She met their gazes with quiet confidence, knowing that her actions were speaking louder than any rumors. The hospital's boardroom was intimidating, with its large mahogany table and polished glass walls. Seated around the table were the board members, men and women in suits who looked at Martha with a mixture of curiosity and caution. At the head of the table sat Dr. Raymond Keller, the chairman of the board, known for his strict adherence to procedure. James was already seated, and as Martha took her place beside him, he gave her a reassuring nod. Across the room, she saw Dr. Harold, who looked visibly agitated. His usual air of arrogance had been replaced with a tense defensiveness. He barely glanced at her, focusing instead on shuffling through a pile of papers in front of him. Linda entered with Ron by her side, holding a laptop and several documents. She greeted the board members, then took her place at the end of the table. Dr. Keller cleared his throat, signaling the beginning of the meeting. "Good morning, everyone. We've gathered here to review some serious allegations brought against Dr. Harold by one of our senior nurses, Mrs. Martha Brown." He gestured to Linda. "Ms. Ramirez has provided us with statements, and we have security footage that may support these claims. Let's proceed." Linda connected the laptop to the projector, pulling up the footage. She briefly summarized the context, explaining that it showed the moment when Dr. Harold allegedly handed Ron an envelope containing hush money. As the video played, the room was silent. The board members watched intently, and even those who might have had doubts seemed to tense as they saw the unmistakable exchange of cash. When the video ended, Dr. Keller folded his hands, his expression grim. He turned to Ron. "Mr. Ron, would you please tell us what happened that day?" Ron's voice was steady as he recounted the incident, describing the bribe and the uncomfortable confrontation. He explained how Dr. Harold had attempted to silence him and Martha, his tone clear and unwavering. Martha watched as the board members exchanged glances, the reality of the situation settling in. Once Ron finished, Dr. Keller turned to Dr. Harold. "Dr. Harold, do you have anything to say in response to these allegations?" Dr. Harold shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room. "With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, This is a complete misunderstanding. The money was for a charitable cause. I was simply trying to support Mr. Ron's family." Martha felt her stomach twist at his feeble excuse. She knew he was grasping at straws, hoping to find a way out of this situation. But Linda didn't let him off the hook. "Dr. Harrell, the footage clearly shows you handing Ron an envelope after a heated confrontation," Linda interjected. "And we have statements from both Martha and Ron detailing your unprofessional and discriminatory behavior. This isn't about charity. It's about an abuse of power." Dr. Keller's face darkened as he listened, his jaw tightening. "Dr. Harrell, this hospital has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment. What I see here is a blatant violation of our standards. Your behavior not only disrespected a valued member of our staff, but also endangered the integrity of this institution." As Dr. Keller spoke, Martha felt a surge of relief. She realized that the evidence and testimonies were irrefutable, that the truth was finally coming to light in a way that couldn't be dismissed. Dr. Harrell's voice grew desperate. "Mr. Keller, please. I've served this hospital with dedication. This is just a misunderstanding. Martha is overreacting and I—" "Enough," James interjected, his voice calm but cutting. "You put your hands on my wife, Dr. Harrell, and then tried to cover it up. I will not allow this behavior to go unpunished." At that moment, Dr. Harrell's face went pale as he realized the extent of his misjudgment. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but the board members' expressions were firm, unyielding. After a long pause, Dr. Keller spoke. "Given the evidence presented, I recommend that we take immediate disciplinary action. Dr. Harrell, you are hereby suspended from all duties pending further investigation. Your behavior will not be tolerated in this institution." As the boardroom fell silent, Martha felt an overwhelming sense of justice. She had finally been heard, and the weight of her perseverance had led to this moment. She glanced at Ron, who gave her a supportive smile, and then to James, whose proud gaze reassured her that they had won this battle. The board members began to rise, concluding the meeting. As Martha left the room, she felt a new strength within her, a strength forged from standing up for what was right. Back in the hospital hallways, as she walked down the hospital corridors, Martha could feel the weight of the ordeal lifting. Staff members watched her, some with admiration, others with newfound respect. Word of the confrontation had spread, and Martha's courage was evident to all. The whispers had transformed from murmurs of curiosity to expressions of admiration. As she passed by the nurse's station, several colleagues approached her. "Martha, you did it," one of them said, a proud smile on her face. "You stood up to him. You spoke for all of us." Martha returned the smile, a sense of peace filling her heart. She knew that the journey wasn't over, but the hardest part was behind her. She had fought, not only for herself, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated or disrespected. As she left the hospital that day, Martha felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond her work as a nurse. She had faced injustice and won, turning a painful experience into a powerful story of resilience. The ripple effect. The news of Dr. Harrell's suspension spread through Memorial Hospital like wildfire. Conversations in hallways, hushed discussions in break rooms, and exchanges over the hospital cafeteria tables, all centered on the same story: how a respected senior nurse, Martha Brown, had stood up to one of the hospital's most prominent doctors and won. For many, it was an inspiring tale, a testament to resilience, integrity, and the power of speaking out against injustice. But for Martha, the victory felt bittersweet. While the immediate confrontation with Dr. Harrell was behind her, she knew that the journey toward real change had only just begun. Walking through the hospital corridors, she could feel the shifts in energy around her. Colleagues she barely knew would nod in respect as she passed, some giving her encouraging smiles. Others avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the weight of what had transpired. A new sense of strength. In the days following the board meeting, Martha's routine subtly shifted. The respect she had garnered empowered her, giving her a new sense of purpose in her work. She had always been committed to providing excellent care, but now her commitment extended beyond her patients to creating an environment where every member of the hospital staff felt valued. One afternoon, Martha was at the nurse's station reviewing patient charts when a young nurse named Alice approached her with a hesitant expression. Alice had recently joined the team and had a reputation for being quiet and shy, often overlooked by her more assertive colleagues. "Excuse me, Mrs. Brown," Alice said softly, twisting her hands nervously. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did with Dr. Harrell. It means a lot." Martha looked up, surprised by the sincerity in Alice's voice. "Thank you, Alice," she replied warmly. "I'm glad it resonated with you, but you don't need to thank me. I did what anyone should do in the face of injustice." Alice nodded, her eyes downcast. "Still, I've had experiences here that made me feel powerless. Like no one would listen to me if I ever spoke up. What you did showed me that I don't have to accept things the way they are." Martha felt a pang of empathy. "Alice, you're not alone. If you ever feel uncomfortable or face any issues, come to me. We'll handle it together. This hospital should be a place where everyone feels safe and respected." Alice's eyes brightened, and she gave Martha a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. That really means a lot." As Alice walked away, Martha's resolve deepened. She hadn't just fought for herself in that boardroom. She had fought for everyone who had ever felt marginalized or overlooked in the workplace, and she intended to use her newfound influence to make Memorial Hospital a better place for all. Resistance and repercussions. Not everyone was pleased with the outcome of the board meeting, however. In the days following Dr. Harrell's suspension, Martha noticed subtle changes in how some of her colleagues treated her. A few doctors she had once worked closely with began to distance themselves, barely acknowledging her in meetings and avoiding her in the hallways. She knew that some in the hospital resented the disruption her actions had caused, viewing her stand as a threat to the status quo. One afternoon, as she was reviewing a patient's chart in the nurse's station, Dr. Peters, a senior physician with years of tenure at the hospital, walked up to her. His expression was guarded, and his tone was cold. "Nurse Brown," he said curtly, barely meeting her eyes, "I'd appreciate it if you could have these patient reports ready sooner. We're already behind schedule as it is." Martha looked at him, surprised by his tone. "Of course, Dr. Peters," she replied evenly. "I always ensure the reports are completed promptly, but if there's a particular concern, please let me know, and I'll address it." Dr. Peters gave her a thin-lipped smile. "Just try not to let extracurricular activities interfere with your duties here, Nurse Brown. We all have a job to do." Martha felt a flash of anger, but forced herself to remain composed. She knew his comment was a thinly veiled jab at her actions with Dr. Harrell, a subtle attempt to undermine her credibility. Instead of reacting, she simply nodded and replied, "Understood, doctor." As Dr. Peters walked away, Martha's frustration simmered. She was aware that some of the older physicians saw her actions as a disruption to the hierarchy they were so accustomed to. But she reminded herself that standing up for what was right sometimes meant facing resistance. She would not be intimidated by those who clung to outdated prejudices. Unexpected allies. Despite the resistance, Martha also found unexpected allies among the staff. Dr. Rachel Lynn, a young surgeon with a reputation for empathy and excellence, approached Martha one afternoon after a long shift. "Martha," Dr. Lynn began, her voice low but full of conviction, "I just wanted to say that what you did was incredibly brave. We all knew about Dr. Harrell's behavior, but no one dared to confront him. You set an example for the rest of us." Martha smiled, touched by Dr. Lynn's words. "Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate your support more than you know." Dr. Lynn nodded, a determined expression crossing her face. "I've seen too many talented nurses and staff members treated poorly because they didn't fit the mold. I'm committed to changing that. If you ever need someone to back you up, I'm here." Their conversation was a reminder that, although the path to justice was challenging, she wasn't walking it alone. More people were willing to support positive change than she had realized, and together they could create an environment of respect and dignity. A growing movement. Over the following weeks, Martha's story continued to resonate throughout Memorial Hospital. Inspired by her courage, other staff members began to come forward with their own experiences. The HR department, once seen as an ineffective bureaucratic formality, was now busier than ever as more employees reported incidents of mistreatment and discrimination. Linda, the HR representative who had helped Martha with her complaint, became a central figure in the hospital's transformation. She worked tirelessly to implement new protocols for reporting harassment and discrimination, creating a safer, more transparent system. Staff training sessions on inclusivity and respect became mandatory, and regular workshops were scheduled to foster understanding among employees of all backgrounds. Martha was heartened to see these changes unfold. She knew that true transformation took time, but every step forward was a victory. It was a testament to the power of perseverance, a reminder that even one person's courage could spark a wave of progress. One evening, after a particularly long day, Martha sat in the hospital's quiet break room, sipping her coffee and reflecting on how far they had come. She was joined by Ron, who had played such a crucial role in her journey, and Alice, who had since become more confident and outspoken. Ron raised his coffee cup in a toast to Martha for showing us what it means to be fearless and for making this hospital a better place for everyone. Alice nodded, her eyes shining with admiration. Yes, to Martha. You're a hero to all of us. Martha felt a warmth spread through her chest as she clinked her cup with theirs. Thank you, both of you. I couldn't have done this alone. We're all part of this change, and we'll keep fighting for what's right together. A message of hope. In the weeks that followed, Memorial Hospital continued to evolve. The culture that had once tolerated silence and complicity was gradually being replaced by one that valued courage, transparency, and empathy. Martha's story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that injustice could be overcome, and that everyone had the power to make a difference. Dr. Harrell's suspension became permanent, and his medical license was under review. The board took a firm stance, issuing a statement reaffirming the hospital's commitment to inclusivity and respect. Though the process had been grueling, Martha felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She knew she had not only fought for herself, but had paved the way for others to stand up, speak out, and demand better. Her journey had been fraught with challenges, but it had also revealed the strength of her character, the power of community, and the importance of resilience. She was proud of what they had achieved, and she knew that the changes would continue to ripple through the hospital, making Memorial a safer and more inclusive space for generations to come. As she walked out of the hospital that evening, Martha took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill her lungs. She looked up at the hospital building, its windows gleaming in the setting sun, and smiled. Her fight for justice was far from over, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead, strengthened by the knowledge that she had already accomplished more than she had ever imagined. A lasting impact. As the weeks turned into months, the changes Martha's actions had set into motion continued to ripple through Memorial Hospital and beyond. The story of her stand against Dr. Harrell spread not only among the hospital's staff, but into the surrounding community. Word-of-mouth accounts and local news coverage turned Martha into a quiet symbol of resilience and integrity, a woman who had dared to challenge injustice at great personal risk. But fame was never Martha's goal. Her primary focus remained on her work and on ensuring that the hospital became a place where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. The atmosphere had transformed. The very halls that once echoed with whispers of resentment now held conversations of camaraderie, mutual respect, and, more importantly, accountability. A network of change. One morning, Martha was approached by Dr. Rachel Lynn, who had become one of her strongest allies in advocating for a healthier work environment. Rachel's energy was unmistakable as she joined Martha in the break room, with a grin that promised good news. "Martha, I have something amazing to show you," Rachel said, pulling her phone from her pocket. She showed Martha a message thread with a small group of medical professionals from various departments who had come together, calling themselves the Alliance for Ethical Care. The group had been inspired by Martha's actions and was committed to rooting out discrimination and advocating for fair treatment across the board. "This started with you, Martha," Rachel continued, her voice filled with pride. "We're all here because of you. People from every department, doctors, nurses, admin staff, they've all joined. We're making this a movement, not just for this hospital, but for the entire healthcare community." Martha felt a lump in her throat as she looked at the message thread. Seeing the names of colleagues she respected and others she had barely known gave her a surge of hope. She hadn't realized just how far-reaching her impact had become. "That's incredible, Rachel," Martha said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined this would happen." Rachel reached out, touching Martha's arm with a gentle smile. "You did more than anyone else here, Martha. You gave us all permission to believe that change is possible." Challenges on the horizon. Despite the positive momentum, not everything was smooth sailing. As Martha became more widely recognized within the hospital, some individuals who felt threatened by the new environment grew bolder in their opposition. Dr. Peters, who had initially shown his resentment in subtle ways, now became openly critical of Martha and her efforts. One afternoon, as Martha was organizing supplies in the nursing station, Dr. Peters approached her, his face contorted with barely contained anger. "Nurse Brown," he said curtly, "I hope you're aware that the attention you've brought to this hospital hasn't exactly been beneficial. We're here to treat patients, not to play social justice warrior." Martha looked up, meeting his gaze with calm resolve. "Dr. Peters, everything I've done has been in the interest of improving patient care. A healthy work environment is essential to quality treatment, and if that means addressing issues of disrespect and prejudice, then so be it." Dr. Peters scoffed, crossing his arms. "You're disrupting the natural order here. This isn't some political battleground. It's a hospital." "It's a hospital, yes," Martha replied evenly, "which means it should be a safe place for everyone, patients and staff alike. If creating a respectful, inclusive environment disrupts an outdated order, then that's a disruption I'm willing to stand behind." Her words echoed in the quiet nursing station, where several colleagues had stopped to listen. Dr. Peters looked around, noticing the support in their faces, and his expression faltered. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Martha with the satisfaction of knowing she had spoken not just for herself, but for everyone who had faced similar resistance. A meeting with the board. A few days later, Martha received a summons from the hospital board. This time, it was not an emergency meeting but a formal invitation to discuss the hospital's evolving policies on equity and inclusion. She felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation as she walked into the familiar boardroom, where the board members waited, along with James, who was already seated, and gave her a reassuring nod. The head of the board, Mr. O'Hara, cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Martha, thank you for joining us today. We've been following the impact of the changes set in motion after your experience with Dr. Harrell. We're pleased to see the positive influence it's had on the hospital's culture, but we'd like to discuss additional steps." Martha took a seat, folding her hands in her lap. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. O'Hara. I'm happy to provide any insights I can." Mr. O'Hara nodded, his tone respectful. "We'd like to establish a formal committee on workplace equity and inclusion, and we believe you would be an ideal candidate to lead it. Your actions inspired our staff, and we think your experience could be invaluable in shaping the hospital's future." Martha felt her breath catch. A leadership role had never been her goal, but she realized that accepting this responsibility would allow her to ensure lasting change for her colleagues and the patients they served. "Thank you, Mr. O'Hara," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I would be honored to help create an environment where everyone feels respected and valued." The board members nodded, satisfied, and Mr. O'Hara continued. "We're also considering implementing a mentorship program to encourage staff from underrepresented backgrounds. We believe this could help build a sense of community and support among our employees." Martha's heart swelled with pride. She had started this journey simply wanting to be treated fairly. But now she was at the center of a movement that would uplift countless others. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "I'd be happy to assist with that as well." The meeting continued with a discussion of policies and procedures, each new proposal strengthening Martha's resolve. She knew that they were building something meaningful, something that would protect and empower future generations of hospital staff. Recognition and reflection. As Martha left the boardroom, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. She walked through the hospital corridors, remembering her early days there, when she had simply been focused on providing the best possible care to her patients. Now she was making a difference on a broader scale. Later that evening, James surprised her with a small gathering of friends and colleagues at a local cafe to celebrate her new position. Rachel, Ron, and several other allies were there, each of them expressing their pride in her accomplishments. To Martha, James said, raising his glass, "A woman who has not only fought for her own dignity, but has paved the way for all of us to stand tall. May her courage continue to inspire us all." Everyone raised their glasses in unison, their admiration for Martha evident in their smiles and warm words. Martha felt a deep sense of gratitude. Surrounded by friends who had supported her through every hardship, she looked around the table, her eyes misty with appreciation. "Thank you, all of you," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this alone. Each of you has been part of this journey, and I am grateful for your support. Let's continue to stand together and make Memorial Hospital a place we're proud to be a part of." The next chapter. As she returned to work the following week, Martha noticed the subtle but powerful changes taking place. There was a newfound sense of solidarity among her colleagues, a shared understanding that they were part of something bigger. The hospital was no longer just a workplace. It had become a community committed to kindness, respect, and justice. Nurses, doctors, and staff members she had never spoken to before would stop to greet her in the hallways, some offering quiet words of thanks or encouragement. For the first time, Martha felt truly at home in the place she had dedicated her life to. In the weeks that followed, Martha began laying the foundation for the mentorship program with Rachel, working together to pair new staff members with experienced mentors who could provide guidance and support. She also initiated regular workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion, ensuring that Memorial Hospital would continue to grow as a place of safety and respect for everyone. A legacy of courage. Months later, as she stood in her office, Martha looked at a plaque she had received from the hospital board, engraved with the words, "In recognition of Martha Brown's courage and dedication to justice." It was a symbol of the change she had fought for, a reminder of the power that lay in resilience and standing up for what was right. She knew that the journey had not been easy, and challenges would continue to arise. But she was no longer the only one fighting. She had allies, a community, and a hospital that had transformed from within. Her story would inspire others, proving that one person's courage could indeed change the world, or at least their corner of it. As she left her office for the day, a young nurse smiled at her and said, "Thank you for everything you've done, Mrs. Brown. You're a true hero to all of us." Martha smiled, her heart full. "Thank you. Just remember, you all have that same courage inside you. Never be afraid to use it." And with that, Martha walked down the hospital corridor, ready for whatever came next. She knew that her legacy of courage would live on, in every nurse, doctor, and staff member who walked those halls with the confidence that they too could make a difference. A new dawn of unity. As the movement Martha sparked began to flourish, Memorial Hospital became a beacon of progress and transformation. Staff from all levels, doctors, nurses, aides, and administrative personnel, began to embrace the changes Martha had fought for. And Memorial soon earned a reputation in the healthcare community for its commitment to inclusivity and respect. Over time, Martha's impact expanded beyond Memorial. Hospitals from neighboring towns started reaching out, curious to learn more about the initiatives she had championed. The hospital board even received letters from medical institutions across the country, inquiring about the policies and mentorship programs that had empowered Memorial staff and turned the hospital into a respected workplace model. One autumn morning, Martha was invited to speak at a regional healthcare conference about the reforms she had implemented. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she stood before an audience of healthcare leaders, administrators, and practitioners from across the state. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice strong but warm, her gaze meeting the eyes of the hundreds gathered before her. "Today, I want to share not only my personal journey, but a truth that I hope will inspire all of you to bring positive change to your own institutions." Martha took a deep breath before continuing, feeling the weight of all the support she had received in recent months. Creating a safe, inclusive, and respectful workplace isn't just about preventing discrimination. It's about honoring every person's dignity, from the CEO to the custodian, the surgeon to the patient. When we treat each other with kindness, respect, and empathy, we build a culture of trust that not only benefits us, but also improves patient care. The room was silent, each attendee hanging on her every word. Encouraged, Martha went on to describe the struggles and triumphs she had experienced in her journey. She spoke of the staff members who had joined her along the way, each of them contributing to a new era at Memorial Hospital, and the unwavering support from her husband, James, who had stood by her side at every step. She ended her talk with a powerful reminder: change is never easy, but it is always worth it. When we speak out against injustice, we're creating a legacy, not just for ourselves, but for those who will come after us. We have the power to build a better future, and it starts with each one of us choosing courage over silence. As she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Many attendees approached her afterward to thank her for her words, promising to take what they had learned back to their hospitals. Martha left the conference feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The changes she had implemented at Memorial had the potential to inspire institutions far beyond its walls. Homecoming. Upon her return to Memorial, Martha was greeted by the familiar warmth of her colleagues. The hospital had always been a second home to her, and seeing how much it had changed reminded her of how far she had come since that fateful encounter with Dr. Harrell. Over the next few months, Martha continued her work with the hospital's mentorship program. The program quickly became popular, with experienced staff members volunteering to mentor new hires, fostering a network of support and collaboration that was unlike anything Memorial had ever seen. Martha's own mentee, a young nurse named Sophia, had recently joined the hospital and was eager to learn from her. "Thank you for being such an amazing mentor, Martha," Sophia said one evening as they finished their rounds. "You've taught me so much, not just about nursing, but about standing up for what's right." Martha smiled, touched by the younger nurse's words. "Sophia, you remind me of myself when I first started here. And just as I learned from those who came before me, I want to make sure you're prepared to lead the next generation. Keep that courage close, and remember that you're never alone." A chance encounter. One day, as Martha was reviewing patient records, she was surprised by a visit from Ron. He had recently taken on more responsibilities in the hospital's administrative department, thanks to the opportunities Martha and James had created for him. "Hey, Martha," Ron greeted her with a smile. "There's someone here who'd like to speak with you." Curious, Martha followed him to a quiet meeting room. She entered to find a man with his back turned to her, looking out the window. He turned around, and she recognized him immediately: Dr. Terry Harrell. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped, and he looked nothing like the arrogant man she had once known. "Hello, Martha," he said, his voice subdued. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I owe you an apology." Martha felt a mixture of surprise and compassion. She took a seat across from him, nodding for him to continue. "I've been through a lot since everything happened," Terry continued, struggling to find the right words. "I lost my position, as you know, and for a while, I blamed you. But the truth is, my actions were my own. The prejudice I carried, it hurt others, but it hurt me most of all. Losing my career forced me to confront things I tried to ignore for years. Martha listened quietly, sensing the sincerity in his words. I've been attending counseling, he went on, trying to understand and unlearn the harmful beliefs that led me to act the way I did. And while I know it doesn't erase the past, I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you. Martha took a deep breath, absorbing his words. She saw the regret in his eyes and recognized the weight of his journey. While his actions had been inexcusable, she also understood the courage it took to confront one's own flaws. Thank you, Dr. Harrell, she said softly. I appreciate your apology, and I hope you continue on this path of growth. We all have the capacity to change, as long as we're willing to learn. Terry nodded, visibly relieved. I won't take up any more of your time. I just wanted you to know that I'm working to be a better person. As he left, Martha felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. It was a reminder of the power of transformation and the importance of forgiveness. Celebrating change. In the following weeks, Martha continued to dedicate herself to her work and the values she had championed. One evening, the hospital organized a gathering to celebrate the progress made under Martha's guidance and to recognize the many staff members who had contributed to the hospital's transformation. James, Rachel, Ron, Sophia, and countless others stood together, their faces shining with pride as they toasted to a future built on respect, equity, and kindness. Today, we celebrate a new chapter for Memorial Hospital, James said, addressing the crowd. A chapter made possible by Martha's strength, her courage, and her unwavering belief that everyone deserves respect. She has not only uplifted this hospital, but has inspired all of us to be better. As the crowd erupted in applause, Martha's heart swelled with gratitude. She looked around at the faces of her friends and colleagues, knowing that together, they had created something lasting. Legacy of strength. In the years that followed, Memorial Hospital became known as a pioneer in equitable and compassionate care. Martha continued to mentor new staff members, her legacy growing with each person she inspired. Her name became synonymous with resilience, integrity, and the power of standing up for what was right. One day, as she walked through the hospital halls, she spotted Sophia speaking with a group of new nurses, her face lit with the same passion that Martha had once seen in herself. Martha paused, watching from a distance, feeling a sense of pride and fulfillment. As she turned to leave, she whispered to herself, "The work we do here, it's bigger than any of us, and it will live on long after we're gone." With that, Martha left the hall, knowing that the strength she had shown, the battles she had fought, and the compassion she had shared would continue to inspire generations to come. She had left a mark not only on Memorial Hospital, but on the lives of everyone who would ever walk through its doors. And in the quiet corridors of Memorial, the spirit of her courage remained, a silent reminder that change was always possible, as long as there was someone willing to lead the way.